right, we're ready to roll then. A couple of pieces of housekeeping. One, last week you should have received the email that had the Abrahamic covenant on cutting a covenant, this handout in the email. If you didn't receive it, please make note on the clipboard we're going to send around, the one that's by the door, in about 5 minutes, Randy, if you want to send it around. It will have both where to write on your email if you have not put your email on the list, and there is a purple sheet for checking out books. So these are the books. 30 years ago, when I was a student at Oberlin, I took courses in Islam, Islamic theology and Islamic mysticism. Was absolutely fascinating. Had an incredible teacher in one of the classes, James Morris, who used to be an advisor to the Shah of Iran and is an amazing translator of Farsi and Arabic. Anyway, that started an interest in Islam, and what a lot of people don't realize is that the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all three have Abraham as their father, and all three work from the same texts. You may or may not be aware that the Quran is really kind of a commentary on the Bible. It has a lot, it doesn't have chapters, it has things called surahs, and some of the surahs are straight out of biblical text in telling the same stories. There's differences of interpretation, which I have found fascinating. But I picked up books over the years on this topic and thought I would just share them with people because you probably can't get them at the Salem Library. This one is by Daniel Peterson, who taught at BYU for 30 or 40 years. My son Steve was an Arabic major and studied with Daniel Peterson. He's the guy who started, goes by several names. I knew it as the Middle Eastern Text Initiative, or METI, and that means they were taking publishing English translations of classical Arabic works that had never been translated into English before. And the contention was, if we aren't reading the same books, it's hard to have conversations where we understand each other. So that's one of Daniel Peterson's major things that he did. He was editor of Farms for a while. But this book, he looks at the two sons of Abraham, Ishmael and Isaac, and their descendants, and helps you kind of put into a context what's happened since their births and down into the modern day. So that's one book. This was a special issue of BYU Studies that is all about Islamic thought. Let me read you some of the chapters or papers in here. Islam, an Introduction and Bibliography. The Language of God, Understanding the Quran, Understanding Islamic Art and Architecture. Al-Ghazali, a Muslim Searcher for Truth. Muslim Perspectives on Military Orders During the Crusades. You can see it's a wide-ranging set of papers in that BYU Studies. I have Karen Armstrong, one of the most widely published theological scholars in the US. I think she's actually British. Let's see. Lots of different best-selling books. A History of God. Yeah, she lives in London. And was a nun for 7 years. I'm sorry, Karen Armstrong. And this one is A Short History of Islam. Then I have 2 copies of this one by Bernard Lewis, who is one of the top scholars of Islam in English. And it's just a great overview of both the religion and the people. Now, many people don't realize how broad the influence of Islam is. The biggest Islamic countries are Indonesia and, why am I forgetting? It starts with an M.
Malaysia.
What?
Malaysia.
Malaysia, thank you very much. And we don't think of those as necessarily Islamic, but they are. They just happen to be very moderate politically, and so we don't get all worried about them politically. Interesting book by Bernard. This is a comparative study of Jews, Christians, and Muslims and how each of them approach different theological issues. So if you're interested in how they read theology, the same text, but very different results, and you can imagine with, say, the Akedah, the offering of Isaac, all 3 traditions have very different ways to interpret that story, right? Really interesting. This one is, if you're just wanting a little bit of fun, this is called 365 Days with Muhammad, and it's stories from the life of Muhammad written for children. And you won't find this kind of thing at many public libraries, unless you live in Detroit or Dearborn. This is an interesting book because Mecca is closed as a city to those that are not Muslim. Let me explain Islam and Muslim. Islam is the name of the religion. Muslim is a member of that religion. It has an M at the front, like the Hebrew, changing from a verb to a noun, right? Add an M. And what it means is submission. Islam is submission to the will of God. And a Muslim is one who submits. So that's how you want to use the words. But these are photographs taken in Mecca, so that you get to see the places we'll be talking about today. Here, for example, is the Kaaba. Kaaba is the Arabic word that is cube, because that's the shape of the building. And at that point, you want to think, what else is a cube? Well, the Holy of Holies. They are comparable, okay? This is a photograph. Each of the little white dots you see is a tent. This is during the Hajj. These are air-conditioned tents set up by the Saudi Arabian government in order to keep people coming on the Hajj. Those are called Hajis. To keep the Hajis alive, especially if the Hajj happens to occur during the summer, when it gets up to 140 degrees outside. It's pretty brutal. Those are the tents, and what else have I marked? Oh, this one, we will be talking about these. These are the hallways. They have built 3- and 4-story tall walkways between the places in Mecca that people need to travel on the Hajj. And in order to keep people alive, out walking in the desert, they have built these huge air-conditioned hallways, and right down the middle is the handicapped lane for people in wheelchairs. So it's really fascinating to see how they have provided for the fact that they may have as many as 3 million people coming to the city for a Hajj each year. You have to get a ticket, and they sell out really quickly. And so not everybody who wants to go on the Hajj is able to. I'm going to pass these around, these 2, so that you can look more closely. Sorry, I lost the bookmarks. We're also going to be talking about the Dome of the Rock, which is in Jerusalem, but is an essential piece of Muhammad's story and to explain why the Dome of the Rock is on the Temple Mount. This book is really helpful and gives you photographs of it. This one, for example, is taken from above looking down on the rock. Because it is an Islamic shrine, you would have to get some pretty high-level permission to get inside there if you are a Christian or a Jew. So we have to just make do with photographs. But that's the Dome of the Rock, and we'll pass that one around as well. Thank you, Kyle. And then finally, because the Joseph Smith Papyri is the source of the Book of Abraham, either it was literally translated from the papyri, or God revealed the Book of Abraham to Joseph after he came in possession of these pieces of papyrus. We really don't know. But this is a book written by John Gee. He actually was working on this in Heidelberg, while we were on our mission. And that's when we came to know John and Kathleen Gee. Randy built lightsabers with his sons while we were on our mission. If you're going to buy any one single book about the Book of Abraham, I would recommend this one, not only because it's well researched, but because it also gives you some great pictures, timelines, maps, etc. of the Joseph Smith Papyri.
Who's the author again?
John Gee, G-E-E. He is one of maybe two current Egyptian scholars teaching at BYU. Yeah, so you can see that facsimile, right, on the lion couch. Yeah, so I'll pass that one around and you can see if that's something you might want to purchase. But you're welcome to sign up on the purple page on the sign-up sheet that's going around if you want to check out any of these books. Trying to put them so that you can see the names on the edges while I talk. All right, I think that I don't know what this is.
That fell out of your 365.
Oh, the 365. It's a map for children of Saudi Arabia and where the Kaaba is, where Mecca is, where Medina is. This is the area that most Book of Mormon scholars will say is where Bountiful was, and that Nahum is right over here. So Lehi is traveling right through the regions that will later, right? Lehi is, what, 600 BC? And Muhammad isn't born until 530 or 570 AD. So there's 1,000 years between Lehi and Muhammad, but they travel through the same regions in Saudi Arabia. If you have friends who were in the military, they will have very strong opinions, every one of them, about where Bountiful is and what was Lehi's route. And I love to listen to their explanations of why they believe they have found the Valley of Lemuel, you know, that kind of interesting thing. So that's what that map is. Okay, so we started. Any questions?
Too many.
Too many. Write them down. Ask me later. Okay? So last week we talked about the different names for Hagar and what it means, the foreigner. That Sarah, actually her name at this point is Sarai, she fixed that, was unable to have children, and so she offers Abram, her maidservant, read slave, right? Hagar, to that she might be built up, that Sarah might be built up in her. I think that that's an interesting use of the word obtain a family, because to build and house and family, it's all the same word. It's the word Beth. And that's the imagery behind it. Then we talked about how when Hagar became pregnant, contention arose between Hagar and Sarah. And so Hagar left Abram's tent and is out in the wilderness. And at that point, something very interesting happens. And that is that an angel comes to Hagar and tells her, you've got to go home, you've got to go back to Abram's tent. You are carrying a child, his name will be Ishmael, and I want him to live. And so Hagar is sent back to who knows what kind of conditions. Except that it's better than being out in the wilderness, certainly. The thing that I noticed was that, and now I've seen this mentioned on, I think it was John Hilton's podcast and some others. This is the very first time an angel shows up in the Old Testament. The next time angels come will be when the 3 visitors show up at Abram's tent. And Abram argues with God about whether or not he should destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And then when Hagar leaves the second time, an angel comes to her again. Now, I got thinking about why, of all the people that we've met so far, Hagar is the first to have an angel visit. Now, I think it's important, and this is how it's written, Malak Yehovah, so, or Yahweh. And Malak is, if you take the word king, Melech, and throw an aleph in the middle of it, you get Malak. And so essentially what the word means is someone representing the king, a messenger. Now, when that gets translated into Greek in the Septuagint, and remember the very first translation of what we call the Old Testament into Greek is called the Septuagint. And the Greek word for messenger is angelos. But I hope that you understand that an angel is not some kind of semi-divine being with wings. It's a messenger from God. That could be a preborn spirit coming to talk to someone. It could be a translated being like someone from Enoch City. It could be a mortal individual living at the same time as Hagar that God sends to take care of her. I just this morning read one of those lovely stories. It was a conference talk, and I'm forgetting who gave it, sorry. But it's been made into a short film or slideshow of a guy whose car just suddenly stops running and he coasts into a gas station. And there he meets a woman with 2 children in the car, and she's out of money and she's fleeing an abusive situation and she needs to get to California to her parents. And he realizes that he has been sent to help. And she asks, after they've had some conversations and he's fed them and given them money and given her gas, she asks if he was an angel. And that's very much the proper usage of the term, is God sending a messenger. The question that I like to consider is, have I paid attention and listened when God was asking me to take a message to someone or to go and do something for them? Probably each of you have had an experience where God sent you to help somebody and you didn't realize it until it was over and you look back and go, oh, okay. Once I was at Joanne Fabrics, sigh, And I thought I should go and see Sister Tour, who was a 90-year-old widow in our ward who lived just a mile and a half from the Joanne Fabrics. So I finished what I was doing and drove over to Sister Tour's house. And she said, "Oh, I'm so glad you came. I am out of my medication. My son isn't answering his phone. I can't get anybody to pick it up for me. I need that medication. I have to take it within the next hour." So I'm like, okay, I know where that came from, right? So I drove her to the pharmacy. You've had that same kind of experience, and that is, I think, technically what angels are. Sometimes messengers from the king will be the elders and sisters who are serving missions. And we've all heard stories. One I remember really well from a woman that I taught when I was a ward missionary. Her name was Teresa Jones. And in a dream, she saw the missionaries. So she knew to let them come in her house and teach her. How many times do people, whether they're Maori chiefs or whoever, have visions or dreams about missionaries before they arrive? That's always really cool. So, Hagar came back to Abram's tent, and then Ishmael was born. At the age of 13, you get to chapter 17 of Genesis, in which Abram, his name is changed at the end of chapter 17. Abram is commanded to circumcise himself and everyone in his household. So he circumcises Ishmael at the age of 13. That becomes the age at which, in many Islamic cultures, boys are circumcised. So it's a passage at puberty rather than at birth for the Jews. Okay? They'll keep that age of 13. Then, at the end of that, we get to chapter 18 and 19, and Isaac is promised to Sarah, whose name is now Sarah. When the three men come to discuss Sodom and Gomorrah, they also talk about the birth of Isaac. And Abraham laughs when he gets the message that at 100 he's going to have a child. And then they're told a second time, and God says, "Where is Sarah?" Well, she's over in her tent. And he said, "Sarah is laughing. She doesn't believe." Now we focus on Sarah laughing. We ignore Abraham laughing. I don't know if you've noticed that. But it's the right thing to do because the child is named Laughter. That's what Isaac means. And it represents the joy that they feel in finally getting this promised child. It has nothing to do with laughter of disbelief or sarcasm. So if you hear somebody put it that way about Sarah, and it's always Sarah who is criticized, Abram laughed first, and that's his name. So you should expect to hear that as part of the story. At his weaning party, and we don't know whether that took place when he was 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years old, you can imagine in a world where there is no refrigeration, you keep nursing that child as long as they're willing, because it's clean, right, and healthy. And interestingly, new studies show that the chemical reactions in the body of a child as it's growing, get into its saliva, the child's saliva, and change what the components are of the milk that the mother's body produces. There's a conversation between the two. So if a child gets sick, the mother puts more antibodies into the milk. If they need some particular protein or something, the mother, and it's not something she's aware of, right? But it's chemical messages back and forth. So Isaac may have been 4 or 5 years old, which means Ishmael at that point is a minimum of 17 or 18 years old when he leaves Abraham's house tent the second time. And it must have broken Abraham's heart. That's his firstborn son. And he loves Ishmael. But God says, do what Sarah asks. One writer reminds us that in a world where slavery is accepted, and Hagar was a slave, and therefore her son would be considered a slave until he's manumitted by his father, until his father recognizes him as his heir or his child. I mean, you've all read enough about Thomas Jefferson to know how all this works. So in a world where slavery is accepted, Hagar and Ishmael were not sold to someone else when Sarah wants them out of the tent. They were set free. And I don't know that we look at that event in that way, as a manumission, a setting free of slaves. Hagar and Ishmael therefore leave as emancipated slaves. Now, these are the typical paintings you will see of Hagar and Ishmael when they leave Abraham's tent the second time. And you will notice, okay, totally incorrect clothing, but also the age of Ishmael is totally wrong. He is 17 or 18 years old at a minimum. And yet, to pull on your heartstrings, they have him as a toddler or an infant that is dying of thirst in the wilderness that Abraham doesn't care about. Okay? Yet we want to rethink how this is. I mean, it's not easy to send away your kids when they're 17, 18, 19 years old. But we've all done it, send them off to school or on missions. Still worried to death about them.
Yeah, some of them it's not hard at all.
Some of them it's really
For some it's not so hard. You might include a little Isaac laughter in the occasion, in fact, with some kids. Especially when you know what they're going to encounter out in the world.
on their own.
On their own. Well, do they remember how to do their laundry? So, Ishmael has been raised in Abraham's house. What do you suppose Ishmael was taught during that 17 years living with Abraham? Do we stop and think about that? How much theology? How much, in terms of righteous action, has Ishmael been taught by his dad? And both times, God sends an angel. When Hagar and Ishmael are dying of thirst out in the wilderness. So I thought, why did God send angels to these two people and not all the other people who've had needs or problems? No, he probably did. We just don't know the story. Many people at the time of Abraham were illiterate and would not have written down their experience with a messenger. May have been family folklore. But I noticed that Hagar and Ishmael fulfill the conditions of being the three special classes under the law of Moses, that of people who have special, that the high priest at the temple and the priests at the temple, the priesthood, has special care to give to those three groups of people. And they are the widows, the orphans, and the strangers in the land.
Say that one more time.
Widows, orphans, and strangers in the land. And at the bottom of this slide, you will see about 15 verses referencing those three groups. Any of those three have special permission to go to priesthood holders in their area and ask for food, ask for protection, ask for whatever they need. And I don't know if you remember back when we had two separate quorums, the high priest group and the elders quorum, right? The high priests were assigned the single women and the fatherless children in the ward. And I don't know that we recognize that that's the law of Moses being applied in our day. That the high priest was responsible legally to take care of these three groups of people. So widows, almanah, is not technically a widow. It means any woman who does not have a man legally obligated to take care of her. So it could be a single woman whose father has died, a single woman who never married and her brother has died, because he would be obligated to take care of her when dad dies. Or it could be a widow or a divorced woman, someone that no man is legally obligated to take care of. And I'm sorry, but in the ancient world, if you were not legally obligated to take care of an individual, you probably didn't, because resources are limited. And so even in other religions, there is usually some kind of provision made for widows and single women, because we're not willing to send them to school and educate them and let them deal with bank accounts and careers, right? And thus, they have needs. And if there isn't a man legally obligated to take care of them, so for example, one of my sons served in India, and in India, any single woman or widow can go to a Hindu temple and they will be fed once a day. The Hindu religion is legally obligated by their holy teachings to feed widows once a day. Now, for us, that doesn't seem like much. But eating once a day is common throughout the world. That's all you have. In fact, I love this one story. I believe that it was from Nigeria. Certainly it's from Africa. And the brethren were trying to teach about the law of the fast and paying your fast offerings. And, we can have quite a discussion about that. But the question came in, so are we supposed to fast for 2 meals consecutive 2 meals, or 24 hours. Because we only eat 1 meal a day, so that would make it 48 hours. Thankfully, the brother who was asked said 24 hours is enough. Regardless of how many meals that is, 24 hours is enough. In fact, missionaries have to be told only 24 hours, because sometimes they get a little carried away in trying to be more righteous, right? And get sick. Yeah. Again, my son who went to India, it did not occur to him the first week he was there, and when Fast Sunday came, that the rule that you don't drink water while you're fasting might not be a good idea if it's 120 degrees outside. And it was only after he had fainted and the mission mom, mission leader now, however we describe it, put him to bed and said, "Elder, you've got to use some wisdom. You have to drink water during a fast." So, yeah. Anyway, widows. Orphans technically are not orphans. They are simply fatherless children. So any children of a single mother, for whatever reason, she is single, that's irrelevant to God. He wants the priesthood to step in and take care of those kids. Make sure they get to scout camp, go on the fathers and sons, go to the daddy-daughter dates, all of those things, all the advantages they would have. Remember when my dad was a bishop, the daughter of one of the single moms in the ward was admitted to Harvard. And she had a scholarship. Her mom could not afford the plane ticket to get her daughter out to Boston. So the bishop used fast offering funds to get that girl out to Boston. And people in the ward complained that no one had paid their child's airfare. Okay, let's talk about this. The kid got into Harvard, for goodness sake. Of course we're going to pay her airfare. Things are not equal. Neither privilege nor problems. And the Spirit is trying to guide and direct the leadership of the ward and the stake to provide what is fair, what God would like. And then third is the strangers in the land. That would be foreigners who are living in the land where there are priesthood holders. I don't know if you know that bishops can give food orders to anyone, not just members. And I remember this was when I was a Relief Society president. I was to have, because we lived out in the Detroit area and didn't have a bishop's storehouse, I needed to have 2 weeks' supply of food in my house ready for whenever the bishop sent somebody for me to feed. And it was not my place to say, "Are you a member? Are you attending church?" All the questions we might ask, that is irrelevant. And I think that what this section helps us to do is step back and say, how merciful am I as a person compared to how merciful God is? Do I need to be commanded to help people who, because of situations beyond their control, just need some help? And that classic question of what would Jesus do? And that's, I think, that maybe the central piece of this story. Now, this is really the few biblical facts. There's a few more that we'll cover about Hagar and Ishmael. But the story of her putting Ishmael in the shade and running, looking for water for her son, is the basis of the Hajj in Islam. So it is the story of Hagar and Ishmael that are reenacted every year by Muslims who are going to Mecca. So when the water ran out, Hagar lays Ishmael under some shade and runs between two hills to find water. And then an angel spoke to her and showed her where the fountain of water was. Now, in Islam, and this is continuing on in Genesis, God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the bottle. That would be a skin bag, right? She probably is not hauling a heavy clay pot around the desert, and gave the lad a drink.
Sister, stay, hold on.
Yes.
You just lost the recording.
Okay.
I just unconnected to the Wi-Fi.
We'll stop for a moment then. Any questions?
Can you turn back one slide?
Yes. Oh, you just want to copy it? Okay.
It's back.
Okay. Now, one thing to know is that in this story, God hears the boy crying. That's his name. Ishmael is God heard. Now, what does it really mean? Have you heard of the Shema that the Jews say every morning? It's the prayer that the Jews would say as they were being burned at the stake in the Spanish Inquisition. Shema, Shema Yisrael. Hear, O Israel. That's Ishmael's name. Shema El. Hear God. Now, does God hear Ishmael? Did God hear Sarah and gave Abram a son? Does Hagar hear God? Did Ishmael hear God? Yes. This is how Hebrew names work. And it is helpful to look up what they mean if you want to understand a story in the Old Testament. Okay, so this fountain of water is known as the Zamzam well. I don't know what that means in Arabic, but that's what it's called. And it is right within the... Okay, I'll come with the word in a moment. The place of worship in Islam.
Kaaba?
No.
The mosque?
Okay.
The mosque, thank you. The mosque that is built around the Kaaba. Can you see those wonderful openings, Arabic architecture? That is a 3 or 4 story wall that surrounds the Kaaba. And within those walls, that's where the well is. And there's Ishmael's name. God hears. Or God will hear, or God has heard. It's ambiguous. And God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. He will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he will dwell in the presence of all of his brethren. Wait a minute. What do they mean, all of his brethren? He only has one brother. He's only got Isaac. So far, we're going to hear about Abraham's other sons, who probably lived closer to Ishmael and were involved with him. We'll learn about that.
And who was their mother?
We'll get there. And so this is again from Genesis. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him out of the land of Egypt. She's Egyptian. She knows people back there. She's going to have her son marry a relative or friend of the family or something. Just like Rebecca and Abraham will send for a wife for Isaac, right? And Jacob will go and find a wife that isn't one of the non-member girls living in the area. Now, Muslims believe, and this is an Islamic map, and the center of the world is Mecca, with the Kaaba. You can see that black square, that's the Kaaba. At the heart, the center of the whole world. Other Jewish and later Christian maps, well, earlier than this Muslim one, certainly, Christian maps will have Jerusalem as the center of the world. It's also known as the navel of the world. So they're doing the same thing, but different cities, right? Different buildings, different holy places. The idea is that Abraham often went to visit Ishmael. It's not that he kicks out Hagar and Ishmael and never sees them again. That's how we think of it. But that is certainly not the way the Muslims tell the story, and it probably isn't reality that way. The tradition is that Ishmael and Abraham will build a temple together for Ishmael to worship the one true God, and it is called the Kaaba. So, if that's true, and I say that because I don't know, if that's true, this is the first physical building used as a temple that we know of in the Old Testament. Now, did Enoch build one in his city? Probably. Does Melchizedek have some kind of structure in Salem? Probably. There's a lot of probablys and maybes out there. And I don't want to say that something is the definite fact, okay? Because we simply don't have the historical documentation, but it's possible. Now, Kaaba, as I indicated, means cube. You can see that right in front of the door in is a small square. That's the well, the Zamzam well. On the left of the door, down at the lower corner, is some strange black shape. That's actually, I believe it's an asteroid that fell and is considered holy and was built into the wall. I'll show a picture of it later. So the Kaaba is the same shape as the Holy of Holies, which is a cube. Now, if you know anything about Plato and how he talks about what is perfect, a cube is perfect. It's 20 by 20 by 20 cubits in Solomon's temple. So there's this idea of perfection in the ancient world that is associated with cubes. Now, the Quran says that God commanded Ibrahim, which is Arabic for Abraham, that's not hard to guess, to sacrifice his son. It does not specify which son. So some Muslims believe that this was Ishmael. Others say, no, it was probably Isaac. But there is discussion about that.
Is that because Isaac was considered the firstborn son?
Well, they're
Even
both
though
firstborn
born,
sons.
Yeah.
right?
Right.
They're both firstborn sons. In fact, there's this really interesting phrase, and this comes from chapter 22 in Genesis, where God is commanding Abraham to offer up his son. Now, the word used there is the word Allah or Olah, which means to lift up. It gets understood as burnt and the smoke rises up to God. That's one of the words for a sacrificial offering at the temple. But it is also the word that means to go up. Now, where do you go up to in the Bible? You go up to Jerusalem, right? Jesus and the 12 went up to Jerusalem because it's built on a some mountains, and it's up from everywhere else in Jerusalem. Well, Hebron is higher probably, but you'd come down from Mount Hebron and then down low, and remember the Jordan River runs down into the Dead Sea at the lowest elevation in the world. So then next to it is Jerusalem, which is built on a mountaintop. So you literally go up and down quite thousands of feet from Jerusalem to Jericho. It's not really clear what God was asking Abraham to do. Let me just throw that out there. It's a little ambiguous. And then he says, take your son. And the Jews have this is Jewish midrash, not Muslim midrash, okay? Muslim midrash, hadith. Jewish midrash. Mormon folklore. We all have it. You should see how much midrash, Mormon midrash, there is about the 3 Nephites, right? So it says, take your son. And one of the comments that the rabbis will make and that people will notice is, well, wait a minute. When God was going to destroy the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham talks back and says, what if I find 50 people? What about 40 people? Right? And they finally get down to 10. We'll talk about that later. But why doesn't he talk back when God asks him to kill his son? That's a really good question. So this midrash is what Abraham might have said to God, talking back, because he has a reputation of doing this. So take your son, and Abraham says, which son? I have 2. Take your only son. Well, they are both the only son of their mothers. Take the one you love. Well, I love them both. Take Isaac. Okay? And so you can see how the Jews make up these stories and help us to see how they see Abraham. I think that's helpful. So, this is again back to Genesis. As for Ishmael, I have heard thee. What's his name? God has heard you. Behold, I will bless him and make him fruitful and multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. And so we have the 12 sons of Ishmael, 1 generation earlier than the 12 tribes of Jacob or Israel. Okay? Because Ishmael is Jacob's uncle. But you've got 12 tribes here and 12 tribes here. Don't get confused. These are the 12 tribes and the names of them, and this is in your scriptures. Chapter 25 is a fascinating one to me. In 22, you have the Akedah, the offering of Isaac. In 23, you have the death of Sarah. So after the offering of Isaac, before Sarah speaks to Abraham or Isaac or sees either one of them again in the biblical text, she dies. So there's this very interesting midrash that Satan comes to Sarah while Abraham is up on top of Mount Moriah with Isaac and says, do you know what that crazy old man is doing now? He's going to kill your son. And again, all the paintings are wrong. Let me just throw this in here. Isaac was probably 37 years old at the time of the Akedah. He was not a child. And there's some wonderful midrash that talks about him agreeing to be the offering, because you can't offer something that doesn't want to die and have it be valid. It has to be done of your own free will. So that's an interesting conversation. So Sarah dies. And this midrash says she dies of a broken heart. In chapter 25, Abram remarries. He marries a woman named Keturah, which means incense. And Abraham and Keturah have 6 sons. And we'll list them on the next slide. One modern commentator on the Hebrew Bible has said that Keturah is the most ignored, significant person in the Torah. How many of you have heard about Abraham's 3rd wife? There you go. Okay. Now here's the interesting piece. The medieval Jewish commentator Rashi, and Rashi is the #1 guy quoted in the Talmud. So this guy is really important. He's like Bruce R. McConkie in the 1970s, where everybody believed every word. I've had every one of his books, right? Rashi and some other rabbinical commentators will consider Keturah to be Hagar's actual name. Remember, Hagar means the foreigner. So the image here is that after Sarah dies, Abraham goes and finds Hagar again. And they will live together and have 6 more sons, who knows how many daughters. They didn't write it down. Now that is midrash, but I really like it because it sounds like something the guy we want Abraham to have been would do. That he's honoring the wishes of his first wife in sending Keturah and in sending Hagar and Ishmael away, but he loved them. So when it's not going to be a problem with Sarah, he'll go find her again. And together they have, 6 sons, and these are the names of the sons. Now, at this point, I read down and said, Midian. Where have I heard about Midian before? Well, that would be in Exodus chapter 3, where Moses meets his wife, future wife, Zipporah, and her dad's name is Jethro, who is a priest of Midian. Everybody is going to tell you that he is a pagan priest. But I got thinking, well, if he's a descendant of Ishmael, and in DNC 84, we are told that Jethro gives the Melchizedek priesthood to Moses, that doesn't sound like a pagan priest to me. So how did Jethro end up with Melchizedek priesthood? And I would suggest that Abraham gave the priesthood to all of his righteous sons. And that Midian, the ancestor of Jethro, right, is one of the sons who had priesthood. One of the things I have found as I read through the Old Testament is how it can be read, how the text can be read as having a huge number of people around who are righteous, who are members of the covenant, and who have the priesthood. It's not just Abram and Sarah, right? Sarai. We talked about how he's probably a stake president with 2,000 people traveling around with him. That Melchizedek is like an area president who works with each of these. And here we have 6 more families who may have had a Melchizedek priesthood holder at the head of their family. And Jethro has been well taught. Remember, he's the guy who teaches Moses about, dude, you have got to share this responsibility. You can't do everything yourself. You've got to delegate. And at that point, they call 70 out of the 12 tribes to help judge, these are like bishops, over the 12 tribes of Israel at Mount Sinai. And the 70 will go up onto Sinai and see God face to face, okay? These are not just dealing with civil cases or something kind of judges. They are, it's a religious position, and it's like our 70. Well, why would they have called 70? Do you remember chapter 10 of Genesis, where there's 70 nations who descend from Shem, Ham, and Japheth? 70 meant all the nations of the world. So God is wanting priesthood leadership over all of the 12 tribes that they have personal access to, not just Moses. And so when Jesus comes along in the second year of his ministry and calls the 70, what do you know is going to happen eventually? First, he called the 12, who are responsible for the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he calls the 70. Who else is going to hear the gospel? All the nations of the world. It's not a secret. It's just in the number. And we don't understand the meanings of the numbers. So we miss the point. But it is also saying Jesus is very much like Moses. And remember, in Deuteronomy it says, there will come a prophet like unto Moses. And if you don't pay attention to what he has to say, you will be cut off from my presence. And Matthew and some of the other writers are working really, really hard to show you that Jesus is the prophet like unto Moses. And ironically, what you're really seeing is that Moses is a prophet like unto Jesus. Right? Okay, I hope you caught that. So, anyway, this I thought was an interesting moment. So, evidence of continued contact between Hagar and Ishmael and Isaac. Abraham lived, this is quoting Genesis, Abraham lived 115 years, 175. And Abraham gave up the ghost and died in a good old age, an old man full of years, and was gathered to his people. Now when it says gathered to his people, that's quite literally what they do. They lay the body wrapped in linens in a tomb, And then they come back a year or two later when all the flesh is gone and only the bones are left, and they gather up the bones and put them in a jar and stick it on the shelf next to all their old dead relatives. You are literally gathered to your people. Okay? Now, we don't do that, but
Actually, they still do it.
they do it in
Louisiana, where you have your crypts.
above ground crypts because
Yes.
of a high water level.
They will
Yeah.
go in, and on the 336th day after the funeral, they will gather the bones and then put them into a smaller area of the crypt. And then it opens up for the next person to pass away.
Biblical. They're going to read the Bible down there. Maybe more than we do. Of course, this is still done in other nations of the world as well, where they don't have the amount of land
Japan.
for burying the dead, right? Cremation becomes the smart thing to do, and you put that jar somewhere. Burials, okay, so when he died, his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which is the cave Abraham bought to bury Sarah in. It is the only piece of land he will ever own, is the burial plot. It's now in the town of Hebron. We'll get there. But burials typically took place within 24 hours. Even to this day, Jews try to bury their dead within 24 to 48 hours. They do not embalm. They have a funeral right away because they live someplace very hot. And we all know what's going to happen with a body. So typically it took place within hours. Therefore, Ishmael must have been living near enough to Isaac for them to be in contact with each other, because he's there the next day to bury his dad. We think Ishmael is living down in Saudi Arabia and that Ishmael and Isaac never see each other again, right? No. And there is actually no proof in the Bible of any strife between Isaac and Ishmael once Ishmael leaves home at 18. There is a moment where Sarah is not sure if Ishmael is going to let Isaac grow up, because he realizes he's just lost his birthright to this younger kid. And children die for all kinds of different reasons in the world.
How much older was
He's at least 14, maybe 15 years older. So by the time of the weaning, he's 17 or 18 years old, Ishmael is. There is no evidence of strife between those two brothers. So Machpelah is the cave. It's the burial site of Abraham and Sarah, later Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah. It is called the Tomb of the Patriarchs, and both Muslims and Jews consider it a holy site because these are their fathers. I mean, technically, only Abraham is a relative of the Muslims, but that's okay. And so they separated it, so there's a Jewish worship area and a Muslim worship area, and they come on different days of the week, but and worship is not the right word. This is a shrine where they are. It's like, I don't know what you want to see in cemeteries on Memorial Day weekend. But if you have any friends or see anyone who is from the South Pacific, they've brought the whole spread. They got half of a pig there, and all cooked and ready to go, and all the rest of the food, and they stay the whole day to commemorate and think about those that have died. We go, show up, put some flowers, take photos, and leave. Yeah. Herod will build this building on top of the cave. He's building huge buildings everywhere. He was a really good architect. He grew up in Rome and studied architecture in Rome. So that's Herod the Great, the dad. Rachel, of course, died in childbirth, having Benjamin, and so she is buried where she died, which is in Bethlehem, and you can go and see the tomb of Rachel. That's the middle word of the three Hebrew words there, is Rachel's tomb. I think it's interesting that it's covered with black silk that's embroidered, just like the Kaaba, inside them. Now, we finally get to, all right. Is this only 31? Okay. This is going to take some time. But I thought in order to better understand who Muslims are, I would teach a class on that. And everything that I have to say is from Islamic sources. That's because if you want people to learn about what Mormons believe, you want them to go to Mormon sources, right? And yet many newspaper people don't do that. Many Mormons don't do that, which boggles the mind. But if you're going to compare religions, I forget who said it, but if you're going to compare two religions, you should compare their best with your best. Right? That's only fair. So that's what we're going to do. So you'll notice a number of different countries depicted here in the photo. It was 2,400 years after the death of Abraham when, in 570 AD, Muhammad, who considered himself to be a descendant of Ishmael, although they don't have that genealogy, okay, it's kind of word of mouth, that's when Muhammad was born. Here is a map, and if you look way down at the bottom right, you will see Mecca, which is where Muhammad is born. This is in the Saudi Peninsula, right? And 200 miles north of that is Medina, which is an important city in Islam. And you can see Jordan and Israel and Egypt, etc., in the surrounding area, and where this map actually was trying to point out that there's two different Mount Sinai's. I don't know if you knew that. The Arabs say that it's this one in Saudi Arabia, but since you have to be Muslim to go see it, conveniently there's a Mount Sinai in Egypt. That anybody who's been to Mount Sinai, that's the one we climbed, right? That's the one we can go to.
Where is the Dead Sea?
The Dead Sea is not even shown on here. It's that, see the little line? Let me see if I can point it out here. This line up there these are the horns of the Red Sea, right? And that's the Gulf of Aqaba. And right where Israel comes down to a point, that's the little tiny point where Israel has a seaport into the Red Sea, in case you wanted to know. But going up from that is the line showing the border between Israel and Jordan, and that is the Jordan River, and the Dead Sea is on the Jordan River. Okay? So they just didn't depict it in this slide. So Muhammad was orphaned. We don't know how young. in Mecca. Mecca is a really interesting place. It had a well that did not run dry. What's the name of the well? Zamzam well. And the Zamzam well has never run dry. Now that's saying something. It had a well that didn't run dry, and therefore all the tribes would go there when the other wells went dry, and it was considered a neutral city that anybody could go to get water. And what you need to get in your mind is this is the Wild West in Arabic tribes riding around on horses, right, from Saudi, and some camels, and raiding each other's towns and stealing each other's animals. And it's just crazy, but they have this one neutral city, and so they all put their gods inside, carved images of their gods, inside of the Kaaba, so everybody uses the same holy space. Muhammad was being raised by his paternal grandfathers, father and uncles, and they were caravaneers. Who else have you heard of that was probably a guy who ran camel caravans? Lehi. Yeah. So very much the same 1,000 years later. Not much has changed in that 1,000 years. So his uncle found him a job with Khadijah, who is a rich widow in town. And here's another version of the map and the pagan tribes. These are all the different tribes. Banu means son of. It's like Ben-Hur, or O'Brien, or Johansson. You're right, all those patronymics, that's Banu. And so you'll see the Banu Kalib, and the Banu Tamim, and the Banu Kalab, and the Banu, that means these are each different families. And tradition says that the Kaaba was just filled with the idols of all of these different tribes. But neutral territory, nobody controls what's going on in Mecca. It's really the Wild West. Meanwhile, at the age of 25, Muhammad marries that rich widow, who is 40. And because he no longer needs to work, because she had money, he spent time thinking about God. He looked around and was quite concerned about all of the idolatry and who knows what other forms of evil going on in Mecca. I'm sure there's trafficking. I'm sure that these tribes are stealing people from each other. I mean, it's the same thing that was going on in Africa. It's the same thing that's going on among Native Americans. That's one of the things you did, was steal the other guy's horses and their women. Okay? And as he is thinking about all this stuff, in 610 AD, while meditating in a cave, it's the cave Hira in Jabal al-Nur. Jabal means mountain. 3 kilometers, from Mecca, about 2 miles. During the month of Ramadan, and it's Ramadan right now, in case you haven't noticed. Muhammad was visited by an angel who said he was Gabriel. And that Muhammad was the messenger of God. I think it's interesting that an angel tells him he's a messenger. And he had messages for the people that Muhammad would memorize. Khadijah, his wife, believed him and supported him. kind of like Joseph Smith's parents and siblings actually believed his story about an angel coming and talking to him and gold plates and all of that. It is very common in the middle 1800s for the newspapers back east to consider Mormonism American Mohammedism, and that Joseph Smith was just like Muhammad. And you may see some parallels as we go through his story. So he began to teach worship of the one true God, Allah. Now, Allah is the generic Arabic word for God. It's not a special name. The Hebrew equivalent, singular, is Elah, the plural Elohim. Okay? And he opposed idolatry. Now, I don't know if some of you remember from the last time I taught Old Testament, how we talked about Abraham destroying the idols back in Ur, and how he opposed idolatry and came to the worship of the one true God. You really need to see Muhammad's story as a copy of the legendary stories of Abraham. And I have that book, I think I showed it to you guys, yeah, I did, that is the traditions of about Abraham from other sources other than the Bible. And these are commonly told stories handed down in the area that Abraham lived in, which is now all Muslim territory. Because Muhammad was illiterate, I think it's interesting to compare that with how Emma described Joseph, couldn't put together a decent sentence. Muhammad would recite the messages from Gabriel, and his friends wrote them down. And that's how they created this collection of revelations called the Quran. And each one begins with recite. So he's being commanded to say these things to his followers. And that's the cover of a Quran that I own. Each of the chapters are called surahs, and they are collected not in chronological order, but from the shortest to the longest. And Arabic reads from right to left, so you start at the end of the book, as we would describe it, and read. And that symbol, over and over and over, that looks kind of like a fancy thing, is every time it uses the name of God, it puts that symbol in the name of Allah, blessed, merciful, and compassionate, or something like that. It's every place that the name of God shows up, they have a special way of indicating it. Now remember, the Jews did that. The King James translators did that with Lord. This is just a really typical thing to do, is honor and keep sacred the name of God. Technically, a Quran should not be purchased or sold. It may only be given away as a gift. So, technically, if you know somebody who's Muslim, it is a great honor for them to give you a Quran. And they would like it if you ask for one.
But they have to buy it.
Yeah, they do, although they, I'm sure, have some way around that. Everybody has ways of doing things they're not allowed to do. Anyway, you know how we give people copies of the Book of Mormon. They would give a copy of the Quran. Now, according to Islamic tradition, at some point during Muhammad's career, the night journey took place. Now, this is 10 years after he announces his prophethood. That's probably years after his first vision. But Muhammad had been in Mecca at his cousin's home, and he went to the Al-Haram Mosque. This is, no, okay, There is no mosque yet at the time of Muhammad. The mosque is built after Islam takes over. So you have to kind of let go of chronological order and reality in this story, more than once. Okay? But the Al-Haram Mosque is that huge multi-story building that surrounds the Kaaba. You can see it depicted in the middle picture. And so he was at that spot, resting at the Kaaba, and Gabriel appeared bringing Barak, which is the the Arabic word for lightning, and it is a white-winged horse. His name is Barak. And Muhammad then rode on the back of that horse, here depicted with, Indonesian woman's head. It's a horse, okay? And took Muhammad along with Gabriel, who accompanied them. He's an angel, he can fly himself, to where the Dome of the Rock now stands. So he was flown in a night vision to Jerusalem, and the horse landed on that stone that you see in the book. And there are some people who claim that these particular marks are where his hooves hit the rock and chipped out the rock. And they have since built the Dome of the Rock on that location. But the dome was not there when Muhammad arrived, obviously. It is not a rock. It is not a mosque. It is a shrine. And the rock is the stone that the Jews consider Eben Shetia, or the foundation stone. The tradition is that the Temple of Solomon was built on top of this stone. That the altar that Cain and Abel used was built on that stone. That Isaac was offered on that stone. This is a holy, holy site. From there, Muhammad ascends into heaven on a vision journey. And he will meet, in this photograph, in this picture, Muhammad is on the back of the horse, which now has on red and white clothing. And Gabriel is next to him, and the four men standing there are Adam, Jesus, Joseph, and Moses. And Muhammad will ascend through the 7 layers of heaven, meeting different patriarchs, prophets on each level. So level 1 is Adam, 2, John the Baptist and Jesus, the cousins are together. Level 3 is Joseph, sold into Egypt. 4 is Idris or Enoch. 5, Aaron and Moses. 6, Abraham, and on the 7th level is Allah, God himself, that Muhammad walked into the presence of, and is then told what it is he needs to teach his people. And this will be where we end. Having been commanded by God to have his followers pray 50 times a day, on his way back down through the 7 levels, Muhammad was talking with Moses, who said, "That's not very practical. I think you should ask for different terms." And so they end up agreeing on 5 times a day instead of 50. Now, a comment on all of these pictures I'm showing. Within Islam today, it is forbidden to show, well, in Saudi Arabian Islam, it is forbidden to show Muhammad's face. So he will often be covered with a veil, kind of like Moses had a veil over his face, or they'll have him from the back. These paintings show that that's not a Muslim belief everywhere. Okay? So when some Muslims objected to showing the face of Muhammad in the newspaper, it was only one radical group. Most Muslims depict Muhammad in their art. And this is a suggestion that you cannot say all Muslims believe and list some idea. There are 5 things, 5 pillars of Islam that all Muslims agree upon. And next week we'll talk about what those are. But just like, what do all Mormons believe? What do all Jews believe? What do all Christians believe? It's a ridiculous question, right? And so I'm just going to try and focus on what the Quran says and what the most conservative, agreed upon by everybody Muslim believes. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I think that as we go through this, you will see some very interesting parallels with some of what Mormons teach. And you may not have realized that there are many ways we are very much like our Muslim cousins. Leave that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.